Hello and welcome to the 55th episode of Business Litigation TV, the internet's most passionate show about business litigation. I'm your host, Jesse David Eisenberg, and I'm a New York City business litigation attorney. Today I want to talk about fraud. A lot of people come into my office and say they want to sue someone for fraud. Now, usually, if I take the lawsuit, I don't sue for fraud, or it's not the main cause of action I sue for. Now, just to reiterate, a cause of action is the theory you sue under, like breach of contract, negligence, along those lines. Now, the reason being that fraud is usually not the main thing I sue for is that fraud is very, very difficult to win on. Not impossible, and I'm not saying I can't do it, but fraud, well, I'll go over the elements of fraud. The elements of fraud are the making of a statement, the falsity of that statement, an intent to deceive, reasonable reliance on the statement, and injury as a result. So, in English, what does that mean? Basically, someone's trying to convince you to do something, right? Let's say they want you to loan them money. And then they want you to loan them money by making a promise. Listen, Joe, I'm getting paid tomorrow. Just loan me $1,000 today, and I'll pay you back tomorrow. Okay, something along those lines. Now, an intent to deceive is very important. What does that mean? That means, let's say that the person who said they're going to, get paid the next day, actually doesn't even have a job. Okay, so that's an intent to deceive to get that $1,000. Now, you have to have given that money in reliance of their false promise. Okay, if you were going to give them $1,000 regardless of what they said, that's not reliance on it. But, as most people would, if they said, I'm going to pay you back tomorrow, there's your reliance. And then you have to have some kind of damages. In this case, your damages are you're out $1,000. So that's what a fraud case would look like. Okay? However, the thing about fraud is it has to have been fraud at the moment they promised it. All right, so in that situation, they're promising you $1,000 when they get paid the next day, okay? Now, if their boss doesn't pay them the next day, right, or something else happens the next day, like they get into a big car accident and they need that $1,000, that's not fraud, because at the time they made the promise, it wasn't false. The falsity happened after the promise, okay? So you're not going to win fraud on that one. And that also brings me to why when I'm doing a case, fraud isn't my main thing, because you may have other causes of action that would make more sense and are less difficult to prove. Like in that one, that's a breach of an oral contract. Okay, and you actually can't sue. This is another thing. You can't sue on a breach of contract and fraud. You're not going to get both. Okay, so if the fraud would have to be something different than a contract. All right. Now, I used the loan promise there, the oral contract, just to explain fraud so you understand it. But, like I said, breach of contract would have been my cause of action on that one, because fraud gets thrown out if it's under the same facts as a breach of contract. I know this can get very confusing, but the main point of this is that while a lot of people come in thinking they've been defrauded, it's usually something else, okay? Now, the other reason that I don't jump to fraud is very specific. In New York, most causes of action, you just have to lay out a basic, this is what happened. Fraud, you need to say what the statement was, when the statement was made, how it was false. You have to plead it with what's called particularity. And if you don't, the case will also be thrown out. Okay, that's why when I do a fraud case, even when I do it, it's coupled with other causes of action in case fraud gets thrown out. All right, and most people don't know the particulars, and it's very hard to prove that the statement was false when it happened. Okay, so again, not impossible, and I've been successful, but you usually want to couple it with something else. So that's why when I make a fraud cause of action, I have breach of contract in there, and I have multiple others if I can, to always give someone an avenue to win. All right. I hope this helped you understand fraud and the cause of action and the difficulties therein. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, Jesse, Jesse, at jdelaw.nyc. All right. Again, I appreciate you watching, and until next time, take care.